So, good evening, good morning, wherever you might be joining us from the world today. Welcome to ASRG World. I'm your host, John Heldreth. We have a great presentation for you tonight. We have Christina Lekati with us from Cyber Risk GmbH. She's going to be talking about some really cool stuff. And I don't want to give all away the secrets of her presentation. However, she's going to be talking about the most important assets that you have in your company. So that's all I'm going to say. But as always, before we get into the presentations tonight, we're going to do a little survey. We're going to see where everybody's joining us from, first of all. So if you can go to pollev.com/ASRG, you can go ahead and put your location in. Where are you joining from tonight? And then I will also have two other questions as well that are going to kind of be the introduction into Christina's presentation. So as people are starting to join the presentation, go ahead, go to pollev.com/ASRG. And just you can kind of click in there, which location you're coming from. It's totally anonymous. It's we're not using it for statistics or getting email addresses or anything like this. It's just to kind of, to have some interaction with the audience. So I thought this was pretty cool. If you don't want to participate, no problem. But for the people that do, go ahead, go to pollev.com/ASRG. It looks like we have someone from California joining, Michigan, my hometown, Detroit, Germany as well. Someone else from the east side of the US. So just stay logged in once you've done, entered your location. We're going to have a few more questions for you before we get started with the presentation. And someone's joining from Mexico. Wow, that's fantastic. I haven't seen Mexico yet in ASRG. Glad to have you with us. UK also joining in. Looks like Dubai is also there. Welcome. So you guys, I hope everybody knows we do have a website, www.asrg.io. This is where you can usually find most of the updated information. We're in the process of updating it right now, so check back soon. Hopefully in the next few months, we're going to be able to go into a new web portal and actually offer some really cool stuff that we have currently planned. So looking forward to that as well. Bangalore, India, welcome. France. Guys, it's so cool that everybody from around the world is joining in a single webinar. I'm really happy to see that. So thanks for joining. Okay, so we have a few locations from all over the world signed in right now. I want to ask the next question. So if you guys are in Poll EV, we're going to just jump to the next question here. And the next question is pertaining to the presentation that Christina is going to give later. So the question is, have you identified your organization's most critical intellectual property assets? Have you thought of or estimated the potential loss if they were to leave your organization? So we have a few answers here. Yes, no. I've never really thought about this. And intellectual property. Well, what the hell is that? So please Send some answers our way. This kind of helps Christina get a better idea of, who's joining, who has experience with like intellectual property assets. Um, have you guys even thought about it? Is it even a consideration? This will help her understand what point she's going to start her presentation and exactly where to focus as well. So, and I love this because we can see directly on the screen the results. So really nice. So it looks like most of the people, so almost 60% are saying that, yeah, okay, we've thought about it. We know what happens if these assets are going to leave the organization. No, we haven't thought about it. We don't know what would happen, 27%, and we haven't really thought about it at all, 18%, but I'm happy to see everyone understands intellectual property. All right, let's go to the next question quickly. What measures does your organization have in place to protect their intellectual property? Are they doing some type of technical monitoring? Are they doing behavioral monitoring? Maybe they have policies and processes in place. They're maybe doing a combination of all these different things. Um, and the last question or last answer is, well, I have no idea what's going on in my company. It's just kind of they do what they want and I do my work. So really, so guys, go ahead and enter your answers here, and then we'll see them directly come up. Uh, I'm happy to see it looks like 78, 64, yeah, so the most people have some type of combination of different measures that are being applied in the organizations, which is really good. Um, I do not know. Unfortunately, it looks like 15%. So there are some people that don't know how their companies are protecting the intellectual property or assets in the company itself. This is something maybe we need to discuss a little bit later as well. So, all right, guys, I'm going to thank you for answering all the questions. I think this is really nice and valuable information. But we're going to jump into just quick overview of ASRG. So I'm not sure if we have any new people joining us today that have never seen an ASRG webinar or been live with us during the webinar. But there we go. First of all, welcome everybody to ASRG World. This is our Corona Safe edition of ASRG. We have today Christina Lekati, like I said. She's for Cyber Risk GmbH. She will be discussing protecting automotive intellectual property from insider threats. So really cool topic today. Really looking forward to the presentation myself. So, but before we go into the presentation, let's talk a little bit about ASRG. And first of all, who am I? So first of all, my name is John Heldreth. I'm the ASRG founder. This is something that came out of a master's work a few years ago. Um, I am the lead product security at Porsche Engineering. So during my daytime, I'm working at Porsche Engineering, and during the nights, I do ASRG. So if you guys want to follow me or contact me on LinkedIn or Zing or whatever your favorite social media channel is, please just add me, talk to me if you have questions, comments, or even ways to make this better. Fantastic. Let me know. So, what is ASRG? Um, ASRG is Automotive Security Research Group. And the Automotive Security Research Group is a nonprofit company focusing on the advancement of automotive security industry. This is a community to support the coming together of two different areas of competencies: the IT security market and the automotive product development market. This is a community for you, the automotive engineer, the IT security specialist, the beginner, the expert, the hobbyist, even for the people that are just clicked on the wrong YouTube link and now they're trying to figure out how to get out of here. This is for everyone. So we're trying to remove the boundaries that can occur in the automotive security industry. This could be communication, it could be location, finding different ways to learn, finding different solutions, making good decisions, because at the end of the day, we all have the same goals. We're trying to keep our customers, and these customers could be our families, our friends, but our customers' data safe and secure, which can only be achieved together. When we talk about security in the automotive industry, we all have the same goals. So this is confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and so on. So this is something that we need to do together. At ASRG, we focus on three areas of development. We focus on knowledge, networking, and collaboration. By knowledge, we want to focus on the increasing we want to focus on increasing the security related competencies within the automotive industry. We want to make sure that the people working on the solutions for automotive products have the right information to make the best decisions, the best recommendations, and so on. Basically, we want to ensure everyone has the opportunity to learn and grow in the automotive security field. Our second competency is networking. If you can't find the information, having a good network of professionals is very important. They might know where to look, have a different experience, different recommendation, a different viewpoint of the problem. We can't know everything ourselves. So as a community, we are stronger. Together, we can support each other. The last point is collaboration. Since ASRG is a nonprofit, we have a unique position in the industry. We are unbiased and offer a space where members and sponsors can innovate outside of their companies. This innovation is organized into projects. Some projects include, we have currently this threat intelligence platform going on. We have the ASRG portal where we keep all the different resources for you guys, for the members. If you want to get more involved and create an impact on the industry, please send us an email. Our email is hello@asrg.io, or I'll give you a few other communication channels here in a minute. First of all, ASRG, where are we? ASRG is worldwide. We have 22 locations around the world. We have more than 4,000 members. Really an amazing thing that's happened. Every time someone sees all these locations, they send us an email, say, "Hey, we want to have ASRG in my city as well." We do discussion, and then before we know it, we have 22 different locations. This started in Stuttgart. I'm so happy to see that we're actually all over the place. The US, South America, the UK, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India, China, Japan, Singapore. I think the guys in Singapore and Japan are probably not participating because probably because it's a little late there. But anyways, The point here is if you guys want to get more involved, if you think it makes sense that ASRG should be in your city, in your country, please send us an email, hello@asrg.io. We'll be happy to talk with you, see what makes sense, and how you can get more involved. Great. So we have so many presenters that would like to speak. We're so happy about this because actually these presenters are mostly coming out of the members. And we have such cool talks coming up. I just wanted to highlight a few of these. We're doing a webinar every week because there's so many topics, so many cool things going on in the industry that, well, we can do a webinar every week. Next week, we have CAN bus versus Ethernet. So we're talking about intrusion detection systems and intrusion protection systems. This is Gilad Bendel from Argalu. A really interesting talk here. July 9th, we have how hacker-powered security can take your organization to the next level. And this is going to be from John Botarani by HackerOne. HackerOne is doing kind of community-based penetration testing. It's going to be really interesting, his viewpoint on how this fits into the industry, how the industry can benefit, as well as the companies. On July 15th, we have Taking the Wheel with Automotive Bluetooth. And Kamil is a friend of mine. We work together in Car Hacking Village as well. He's actually going to give this talk for the people on the other side of the world. So in the time frame of Singapore, Japan, China, and Sydney. So it's probably going to be a little late if you're for the guys in Europe or on the other side. But anyways, it's going to be a great talk. He's a security researcher. He's always doing interesting stuff with Bluetooth. What's not expected. So please join in on July 15th for that one. The next day, July 16th, we have CAN bus attacks and mitigations. Ken Tyndall from Canis. He's recently put out a white paper about security on CAN bus. Really cool stuff. He's going to go through and show us how, why, and what's going on with security on the CAN bus. July 23rd, we have relay attacks applied to NFC virtual car keys. And we all know that these new smartphones with our keys integrated is going to be one of the next big things. Enrico Pozzobon, he's actually researching and doing his doctorate at Regensburg University, OTH. He's going to show us, demonstrate, and also go through the theory about this relay attack. It's going to be really interesting. And we have more webinars. We have things planned all the way until, I think, mid-September. So check back often. We'll be updating this. Really cool presentations going on. All right, so you've heard enough from me tonight. I want to introduce Christina Lekati. I've known her for about a year now. She's got really interesting talks always, and she came and spoke with us face to face at ASRG Stuttgart. So I'm very happy to welcome Christina Lekati back from Cyber Risk GmbH. And today she's going to talk to us about protecting automotive intellectual property from insider threats. So Christina, welcome to ASRG World.
Hello, everyone. John, thank you for inviting me again. I hope everyone is well from wherever in the world you are right now. We are here to talk about a topic that does not get the publicity that other cybersecurity topics in the automotive industry are getting right now. It's not about car hacking per se. It is about something that works more in the shadows, affects very badly companies and organizations in the automotive industry, can be an extremely expensive threat and has the power to shift market dynamics. And as John said, it is about protecting the automotive intellectual property from insider threats. A little bit of what we are going to talk about, the overview of this presentation, because of course we cannot cover everything, but we can cover a good deal of things, is the role of the intellectual property in the automotive industry, the market dynamics, and how it works today. Practically, why do we talk about intellectual property and why it is so important? The intellectual property theft from insiders, how do they do it, their motives, why this happens, and what kind of organizational flaws are they taking advantage of to get this done. Theft of IP from foreign governments and or organizations, and this is a topic that we have to touch upon. It has to do with industrial espionage and economic espionage, and because the automotive industry does affect the national gross domestic product, it does also it is a target for economic espionage as well. And last, we do not want to create nightmares for everyone. We don't want you to have a bad time with us. There is going to be a section on mitigation strategies and countermeasures, and of course the closing remarks, so that we can ensure that nobody leaves this presentation being just totally scared and desperate. No, we're not here to become more desperate, but the opposite. A little bit about me. Who am I to talk about all that? I have a background and a degree in psychology, and I am focusing on the human element of security. That includes social engineering, insider threats, and the end user. In reality, my history in cybersecurity goes way back because of my father, who is also a professional in the field and through who I learned a lot, and I got involved in different projects from a very young age. So I have participated in penetration tests, in needs and vulnerabilities assessments, and of course in trainers and consulting projects. And right now I am focusing on the training and the consulting with CyberRisk GmbH on the human element of security. But without further ado, let's just dive right in the topic. What has happened in the automotive industry the past few years? So for centuries, we see that the automotive sector was considered a mature industry with well-established players. The dynamics were pretty much set, and the topics and the technologies that automakers had to deal with were pretty standard, and it did not include digital aspects as much, but mostly manufacturing problems and innovations. But this dynamic has shifted. Although customers knew what the core competencies of the automakers were and were more or less familiar with the players in the industry, this dynamic is now different because new players are entering and new elements are entering in the automotive security. The fact that fully autonomous vehicles are coming in the market, although they are not here yet and they are pretty far from reaching, the driving assistance technologies and the new technologies that have been introduced are already shifting the market dynamics and the market leaderships. The World Intellectual Property Report has already reported on practically the increasing trend in innovative activity in automated vehicle driving. We see a much bigger percentage of patent filings that are happening over time. We see a very huge increase in patents and in innovations, which means that a big amount of money is being right now invested in research and development and in making automated vehicles work. Of course, this does not only include automated vehicles per se, but also, as we said before, driving assistance technologies and other patents. More than that, in the face of the AV technological shock that is happening right now, automotive companies have an incentive to join forces and to share the costs and risks, but also defend their market position by collaborating with other external market players. Of course, not everything is happening in-house for a very long time now. There are tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, but there are also many more companies that are now assisting research and development and are enhancing the whole concept of autonomous driving and smart cars and all that. We have here a very small example, just one of the many long lists of examples of collaboration between the automotive industry, main players in the automotive industry, and other technological companies. There are new automated driving systems that are being introduced, automated vehicle service applications, the vehicle design, simulation, validation, and certification processes that are still happening from different suppliers, different startups, or different major companies in the industry. This means that a lot of IP is being distributed right now. As we said, the automotive industry is in the early phases of a period of technological disruption. There are several new entrants, which means that the term automotive industry in general is now very broad, because we do not only have the automotive makers or the suppliers, but we also have the technological side. New technological firms, especially smaller startups that occupy very small niches and are focusing on hardware, software, mobility services, connectivity, communications, and many more aspects. Now, in terms of intellectual property, this means two main things. First of all, and as we saw from the diagrams before, there is a significant increase in the numbers of intellectual property related documents and patents. And we did this question in the beginning where we asked about how many of you actually know what your critical intellectual property assets are and whether you know what would happen if you lose them. But when they are that distributed, do you really know which ones they are, or are you treating them as dust in the wind? The point here is that no, they should not be treated as dust in the wind, and although control is difficult to exercise, it should still be exercised. And the second main thing that has happened in regards to intellectual property is that there is a decreased control over the ownership rights and the sharing of this intellectual property. There were too many lawsuits that happened between suppliers to the main automotive makers that claim to be sharing the same patents or with small differences, generally similar technologies to different clients. So even though there were contracts that stated that certain intellectual property rights were given to specific owners. Still, because this is not a tangible asset, but rather an intangible asset with small shifts and tricks in the way things were phrased and the ways things were provided in the contracts, but also in the service itself, we saw a lot of overlap between what was being delivered in the end in the client and what was giving an intellectual property advantage. So with the way the market dynamic is shifting right now in the automotive industry, the first mover advantage is increasing the stakes in the market share, the stakes. That means that the company that is first going to produce the biggest, better, and most fancy automated car, or smart car, or the car with the best feature is also going to get a better market share in the industry. The first mover advantage is something that all companies are running after. It's very beneficial to them. And this is probably why sometimes you're being pushed to deliver a product in the market, even though many of you are convinced that it's not finished yet, because companies want to get the first mover advantage. And now vehicles are already coming to the market featuring at least some level of automation. Some are being tested on public roads that are supposed to be fully autonomous. And while all this is happening, companies are still trying to figure out the best combination of intellectual property to combine and to build the best car possible. This makes us need to focus more on IP rights management and the protection of this IP. IP is now one of the most important and one of the most valuable set of assets that an automotive company can own. Technology and innovation are shifting the market dynamics, and intellectual property will play a major role in the way the industry will be shaped within the next year. And the next years, actually, because this is a long game. And the companies in the automotive industry that are not fit to follow through and to adjust to these changes are most probably going to die out. But we talked a lot about patents already, and patents is something that the automotive industry knows too well. However, intellectual property goes beyond the patents alone. Specifically, intellectual property refers to creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. And this is a very vague term, of course, but it also includes proprietary software and source code. And you can see now how this is very relevant to the technology you are developing, to customer information, and this becomes relevant also when it comes to customer data that are going to be logged in the systems of smart cars, and they would need to be stored somewhere and also protected. Then we go into product-related IP, such as designs, formulas, and general schematics, and of course, business plans, trade secrets, proposals, as well as strategic plans. So intellectual property that has to do with the next organizational or business move of the company. As you can see, it is pretty broad. Let's talk about insider threats. Who are they, and why do they leak or steal intellectual property? We will start from the very basics. Who are insider threats? Insider threats are, by definition, any current or former employee, partner, or contractor that has or used to have access to the organization's digital assets and may intentionally or unintentionally abuse this access and harm the organization. This is a mouthful of a definition. We're going to break it down right away. So it is any current or former. That means that an insider could be working right now within the company, or they could have been already let go and terminated and still have access and exploit that access. They could be an employee, current or former, a partner, business partner. We have the suppliers in the automotive industry, tier 1, tier 2, and all the other partner companies, or a contractor programmer, a contractor, anything. And they may intentionally or unintentionally abuse their access and harm the organization. In the case of intellectual property, in most cases, insiders intentionally take the intellectual property with them. They steal it intentionally. It never happens unintentionally. It only happens unintentionally when an insider has been targeted by a foreign entity that wants to steal intellectual property for an economic advantage in the case of economic espionage. This is the only case that I know of where insider theft of intellectual property happens unintentionally. We are going to talk about it a little bit more further down the road. Who are the usual culprits? Who are the ones that are stealing this intellectual property? They are usually current employees or contractors. They have already authorized access to the IP they steal. They usually steal it during normal business hours, so that nobody can think that there is unusual behavior when it comes to the systems and technology that is being implemented, because they just access it normally and then steal it in different ways. They are usually the scientists, engineers, contractors, salespeople, and others. And they are, of course, the ones that have in some way contributed to the creation of this intellectual property. So technically, it is their brainchild to some degree, or they feel that they have contributed so significantly that they righteously own it to an extent, and that it is not the company's ownership. And this is also where the contracts that you draft as a company play a very significant role, because this part should be a separate paragraph where it clearly states that any intellectual property that is being created by an employee belongs to the organization and not to that employee. So there is a very typical misconception considering why insiders steal intellectual property. Many think that they steal it because they want to sell it. But research has actually shown that they steal it for a business advantage. And that business advantage could be either, and really, in most cases, it is because they want to get a new job at a competing business and they want to provide that competing business with an extra benefit. They want to show that they have a competitive advantage as a talent, as a potential candidate, and that they have a lot to offer given on their past experience. Or in the case of industrial or economic espionage, they steal it in order to send it to a foreign government or organization. In this case, a lot of the other things that apply to insider threats that steal intellectual property from themselves does not apply, because simply the insiders that steal it in order to send it to a foreign government or organization do it because their loyalties lie elsewhere and they want to support that other country most often. Of course, there is a case that made the news many times, and this is a case that is still ongoing. Many of you will probably have heard of it. It was the battle over Anthony Lewandowski. I hope I am pronouncing it correctly. That went from Google to Uber and was accused of stealing about 14,000 design files from Google's car projects. It was reported that he just plugged a memory card reader into the laptop and shortly afterwards just wiped out all the data from the laptop. This activity was not detected, and on top of it, it was alleged that 2 more auto employees took files on their way out after being terminated from their companies, or around the time they were terminated. The due diligence report, as it was reported by Bloomberg, showed that months after Lewandowski left his previous job, he possessed and destroyed highly confidential Google proprietary information, including source code, this is intellectual property of course, design files, engineering documents, and software related to self-driving cars. Remember that we said before that many do it so that they can get a business advantage and get a position to another company. So it was said that Anthony Lewandowski tried to entice Uber into hiring them because of this intellectual property that he owned. However, Uber reported that this engineer is on his own, that they didn't have anything to do with it, and that they were not actually having knowledge of what happened. Now, the details of that are not published, and we're not going to actually look into it for the purposes of this talk. We just care about the fact that a person working for Google, which is not a small company, not an insignificant company, was still able to download 14,000 design files just by plugging a memory card reader into the laptop and just walking out with them. He acted on his own. However, it doesn't always happen this way. There are 2 main types of individuals, of insiders that steal intellectual property. And of course, the one is the insider that acts alone, like Anthony that we discussed about before, and the recruiters. Let's start with the individual. The individuals are individuals, they act alone, they usually have helped develop the IP and they perceive their role in its development as being very important. So they have mental stakes in the whole project and they usually feel entitlement and ownership of this IP, often even if the contract states that they do not have it. It is a feeling that they develop because, again, it is their brainchild. They also have an intense and explicit, they show intense and explicit evidence of entitlement or possessiveness in many cases. So when we have strong feelings, those strong feelings tend to leak out, and the chances are that co-workers or managers are going to hear you say how possessive, or see you being possessive of the IP that you have created as an employee within an organization. In fact, in many cases, there were insiders that were refusing to share the data of the IP they developed with the main backup systems. They just wanted to keep it in their private laptops. They didn't want to share their IP with other members of the organization or knowledge pools, and they were just keeping them for themselves and using them when needed. Of course, this is evidence of possessiveness, and it should raise a little bit of a red flag to the managers that were handling this person and were seeing this happening. Also, other employees are usually aware of these attitudes, and it is in fact one of the red flags. Now, in the case of recruiters, there is one insider that is trying to recruit other insiders for theft of IP. This happens because usually they do not have access to all the information that they need. Most often they want to gather more information. They might to try to assemble an entire strategic plan or an entire software system so that they can either remove this information and then create a competing business, or just send it to a competing organization that, again, as it was said before, belongs to a different country or a different government, and they do it for industrial espionage purposes. These people are usually manipulating the insiders that they are recruiting, and they motivate them, and they fuel them their way by promising higher rewards, usually monetary. However, these both types share a lot of common characteristics when it comes to the way they act, and that's why we are also going to focus on the individuals, because they are also the main type of insider that is going to steal intellect. Now, as we said before, it is very important to spot these people when they explicitly show a sense of entitlement over what they produce, even though it has been explicitly communicated that they are not entitled to the IP that they create. They show and handling. Sometimes they are just pissed off, happened, that perfect way. They just situation. Now, what is also very important to know, very tricky parts of IP theft, is that detection is practically hard or impossible until the data starts being transferred from a device, until practically the, the data is being stolen. So, how can you really spot and monitor somebody that has not yet acted on a crime, that has not yet done anything? And how can you respond fast when you only get you only get a red light popping up during the act of stealing it? We know from research that most IP theft happened within 1 month before or after employment termination. This allows the security teams a 2-month window of opportunity to monitor this person more closely and to identify whether there is suspicious activity happening around that person. The most frequent data exfiltration methods were emails, removable media, like in the case of the Google employee, Anthony, the ex-Google employee, and of course, remote network access. However, physical exfiltration of information also happens. The insider often feels that they are exfiltrating what righteously belongs to them, and often, contrary to common belief again, they are not even going to try to conceal their theft. So, this allows security teams a way to monitor and understand whether something is wrong. If they know what information, what critical answers this person is handling, and by the time their termination is approaching, or after this person has been knows that they will be terminated, they keep an eye and monitor closely the IP that they handle. Then they have more chances of detecting suspicious activity. Of course, there are more concerning indications, and disgruntlement is always one of them. Suspicious comments like entitlement, possessiveness, as we said before, strong behaviors will leak out, and the truth is that water cooler conversations are still very important, even if some technical system will not detect suspicious activity due to the fact alone that people talk and people express themselves. Chances are that an employee or a manager will hear something suspicious, and then the bet becomes, can they recognize it as suspicious activity, or will they ignore it? Will they report it, or will they ignore it? And then, of course, we have the technical measures in place that I aim to detect unusual IT activity, accessing controls that are not in place, emailing that is not supposed to be happening either because it has very big documents attached or because it transfers documents with keywords that relate to new products or significant IP, and general IP exfiltration with different methods. And we talked about disgruntlement. And if you feel that disgruntlement is not important, I will just refer you back to the case of Elon Musk and the Tesla incident that happened that most of you will probably have heard about or read about. Disgruntlement is explicit and can lead to malicious insider threat activity. Now, not all dissatisfied employees are going to be insider threats, but many insider threats, and in fact, the majority are also very disgruntled. And in the case of Tesla, there was an individual that did not receive the promotion that he believed he deserved, and he just decided to sabotage the operations of Tesla, both on a technical, on an IT level, and by exporting large amounts of highly sensitive data and just delivering them to unknown third parties. This is why we are also discussing the behavioral indications, because if that had been paid the appropriate amount of attention back then, perhaps this incident could also have been avoided or de-escalated before all that happens and before Tesla ends up in the news. We also mentioned briefly before that when an insider act takes place, there is usually an enabler within the organization. Practically, there is often an exploitable weakness with the employer's own protective security or management practices, which enables the insider to act. What are those usually? Well, poor management practices are topping the list very often because disgruntlement stems from bad management and from neglecting behaviors and problems even if they were noticed and they just decided to remain unaddressed. A manager might have observed a very problematic behavior or a conflict and just decide to ignore it. What happens in this case? It just only escalates and it becomes worse. And with escalation comes the will to revenge the organization, and with that comes the possibility of his insider threat. Oftentimes, there was also a very poor usage of technical and auditing functions. For example, the absence of sufficient technical control, data leakage tool or data loss prevention tools, rare or unsystematic IT auditing that would spot irregularities or unusual behaviors, and generally lack of oversight and monitoring. Insiders knew about it, they felt free to act, and that enabled them to feel secure in just going on with their activity and stealing intellectual property. However, this is something that is true for all cases of insider threats, also the ones that are related to IT, insider fraud activities, etc. A poor security culture also gives to that more ground because lack of adherence to security policies and practices are often allowing insiders to have access to foreign computers, to sensitive materials. And in many cases of insider threats, there was no control to the access the insider had in different accounts or in different assets in the organization. So very poor access management, which meant that the individual, as the more they were moving within the company between projects or between job positions, they were just accumulating privileges and they had access to information beyond the scope of their work. And last, as we mentioned in the beginning, and as we're going to say again, poor asset management, lack of proper inventory, lack of knowing what your critical assets are, which are the documents that are most critical, where they lie, and putting appropriate security around them. easy access to hardware and software assets, trade secrets, and other proprietary information enabled insider threat activity. Now, of course, when it comes to countermeasure, there is not just one solution that can get you through. Both technical and behavioral monitoring is required, and this is an outcome that is coming up again and again and again in research papers, in studies, in everything that has to do with studying insider threat activity and prevention. However, most organizations in the automotive industry cannot or have not identified all of their most critical computer files. This is because it is often a very overwhelming task, especially in large organizations of the automotive industry. Add to that the fact that plenty of the critical files are consistently being exchanged back and forth between trusted business partners and suppliers. That means that they leave the network of the company frequently because there needs to be communication with that business partner. Because of this complexity, and in addition to implementing technical solutions focusing on critical assets, there should be targeted monitoring of employees or contractors surrounding the termination of their contracts. Remember that we said before, most insider threat activity happened upon 1 month before somebody would leave the company or 1 month after. So, monitoring more closely these people and the IP they handle around termination has proven very, very significant to detection. Actions involving removable media, emails, and other methods used to exfiltrate data should also be closely monitoring. These are the technical controls. However, as we said before, people talk and people listen and people express themselves when they are being disgruntled, when they plan on taking another job position, because they think they have a competitive advantage. They like to boast about it and they will boast about it to their coworkers. Because of that, it was also found in the third guide to insider threats and the big study that they did on prevention, detection, and response in cases of insider threats that 72 of IP theft cases were actually detected and reported by non technical employees. So people that observed the sign and knew how and where to report it. They spotted the behavior or they spotted suspicious activity and decided that this feels odd, this feels strange, it shouldn't be happening this way, and decided to report it. It is being said that the signs of insider threat activity, although tricky to detect, although the only possibility for someone to detect it while the intellectual property is stolen, leaving you a very small window of opportunity for both detection and response, the signs are still observable by both technical or non-technical means if you are vigilant and if you are willing to invest in a good strategy around the topic. Of course, appropriate policies and procedures are also essential. So we have three things that interplay and that help strengthen that front. Technical means behavioral monitoring. Also, the employees are included in that, the co-workers, and appropriate policies and procedures that have to do with how somebody is being terminated, what happens after termination, what access is being restricted, physical or digital. Actually, let's look at them into a little bit more detail. It is not an exhaustive list. It cannot be an exhaustive list, and truly countermeasures depend on the needs and facts that exist within an organization. But these are some of the most common countermeasures that you can take. First of all, understand what positions are at risk. Who are the people that are handling the most critical IP? What are the documents that they handle? Are these documents being protected? And are you willing to have appropriate oversight over them around their termination, whether they are employees or contractors? To recognize the patterns and the organizational factors that surround IP theft. We talked about some of them before. If you have them in mind, you can be more vigilant and you can actually spot suspicious activity when it happens. To that is added employee training on insider threats. If employees observe suspicious behavior but they do not have the confidence to report it, or they are unsure about it, or they feel that they shouldn't play God, then nothing would happen really. Then you have one of your three countermeasures completely eliminated. No, employee training on insider threats should be there, and it actually makes a very big difference. We talked very much about what happens around termination of an employee, and therefore improving the policies and processes around termination is very important. Also, being very thorough about cutting off access upon termination, taking away physical keys, etc. Because many times people leave and they take with them keys, security badges, and a lot of other things just because they forgot to take them, to remove them from them. And that's because there was not the appropriate process in place. In addition to that process, a clear reporting process in case of suspicious activity, because it is one thing for an employee to spot and detect suspicious activity, and a whole other thing to actually report it. If they just know how to spot it and they don't do anything about it, it's good as nothing. It doesn't matter. But if they have the confidence to report it and they feel protected, we are going to talk a little bit more about it later on, then the chances are that you will also be able to detect it much faster and much more accurately. Of course, as we discussed before, well defined and clear contracts on IP development rights and ownership should be in place. Who owns what? Um, Also, this is important later on if the case ends up in the court, or if there is a crime and you need to prove that the ownership was actually belonging to you and somebody stole it from you. It's very good to have the contract in place that states clearly whose ownership, who has the ownership of the IP. Because again, in many cases, a contractor might take away the solution they've developed and provided for somebody else, and then just claim that it belonged to them from the start, because it was not clearly defined in the contract that what was developed for another company will actually belong to that other company as well. Of course, again, as we said before as well, the technical countermeasures should be in place. They cannot not be there. And that includes data loss prevention systems, digital rights management, data leakage tool. They're pretty much the same as loss prevention systems. They help a lot at another layer of security when emails with big attachments or very specific documents are leaving the organization. And last, review and adjust the access controls on the people that move to different projects, different departments, and different areas in your organization. Do they still have this what we call the least privilege principle, or do they just accumulate privileges and have access to information that is way beyond what they need to use and way beyond their work responsibilities? And again, in many cases of insider threat activity, it was found that insiders were able to accumulate privileges and therefore steal and take away much more intellectual property than what they were currently working on at the time. Now, this was all that, these are the main points surrounding insider threats that act on their own and that act within a company for their personal motives. However, there is also theft of IP from foreign governments or organizations. And that, as we said before, this is a topic that we cannot deep dive in because it's very big. It's a whole other talk on its own, but it involves economic espionage and industrial espionage. Economic espionage is, by definition, the conscious and willful misappropriation of trade secrets with knowledge or intent that the offense will benefit a foreign government, foreign instrumentality, or foreign agent. Usually, and the automotive industry is actually included in that sector. Companies, industries that have the power to influence a nation's economy are being targeted for economic espionage by other governments. And then we have industrial espionage. This is the espionage that is happening mostly between competing organizations. And by definition, that is the conscious and willful misappropriation of trade secrets related to or included in a product that is produced for or placed in interstate or foreign commerce to the economic benefit of anyone other than the owner, with the knowledge or intent that the offense will injure the owner or that trade secret. In this case, as we understand by the definition, this involves competing organizations wanting to harm one of their competitors or wanting to get their intellectual property so that they can utilize it first and practically get a step ahead with that intellectual property and win the game practically. Insider threats that are conducting industrial or economic espionage are usually the ones who infiltrate an organization or get recruited while they work in that organization by an external party. Very briefly, I will just mention that they misuse their access and involvement to the intellectual property rights that they have and the development, their part in the development of the intellectual property in order to benefit a foreign entity. So they practically act as enablers for somebody that is outside the organization, eating up the intellectual property assets from within. However, this is one of the very few cases where we also have unintentional insiders. In this case, insiders are being targeted by somebody outside the company, whether they belong to a different government or a competing company. Uh, And that external threat actor is practically taking advantage of one small vulnerability, one small misappropriation in terms of security practices from that insider in order to steal a device, documents, anything from that insider without the insider's knowledge. A very common technique, a very common situation that is happening is targeting business travelers during travel at airports or in the planes themselves. There are books dedicated to this topic and how to apply appropriate security measures while traveling so that you can avoid being targeted by threat actors that are conducting economic espionage or also in hotels that are not secure. This is a whole other topic, but it relies heavily on how well the traveler or the insider knows how to protect the assets that they carry while they are in transit, while they are outside of the organization. This is also a very, very tricky situation because if a business traveler that has on his device intellectual property, if they lose it while they're in another country, it is very difficult to recover that IP from that country because it has left the legal jurisdiction of its home country. So it can be considered lost forever, and it's very hard to prosecute as well. Let's talk about reporting. We had the case of, we just talked about insiders that get approached, might get recruited. And there was actually the case of someone who went abroad on a project and during a networking event got approached by a pretty friendly, a fun individual and struck up a conversation. They had a few beers, the conversation was pleasant, and eventually that other individual offered the their their target a pretty large amount of money to provide access to the corporate networks. That person wasn't very happy with that they felt that this was suspicious. They rejected the individual. They said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm sorry. But shortly after, they noticed a co-worker enjoying a very large amount of sudden and inexplicable wealth. Now, that other individual also had access to the network. They could provide the access to the corporate network that they requested, and they had done a similar trip a few days later. So he felt that the two incidents could be related. Did they do something about it? He got approached, he rejected the offer, and he felt that somebody else actually accepted the offer. Did he report it? No, he did not report it. He didn't say something. He said, I didn't ask about it and I didn't report it because I felt I would also be implicated. And actually, I would rather not be involved at all. And now we come to the whole point of what happens when you have an asset that could leak out, that could be stolen, that could be given somewhere else, and your technical measures cannot detect it. But potentially the employees can detect the suspicious activity and can report it. The point is, will they, and have you strengthened them enough to do so? Let's see what the research says. And one of the latest research on the topic was done by Redcoat Cybersecurity. It was on their Insider Threat Report. And they took a very large sample of participants from different countries, different roles, and about 15 different industries. And they asked them whether they would report something, whether they would, they would feel free to report something, whether they know what to do when they observe suspicious activity. Most of them said that they had a very high reluctance to report. They did their mental cost benefit analysis for reporting, and they felt that they wouldn't have any benefit because of moral inhibitions, because they feared judgment within the organization. They felt that there would be a stigma around them, and they feared for personal risks. So they decided that it wouldn't benefit them to report suspicious activity and that they would rather stand back. Some testimonials say that I would rather come forward as a witness after the attack than risk my life and career being ruined by reporting it earlier. And this is actually reflecting a very common pattern between people that observe something and do not say something. Others that decided that they could potentially report it said that they didn't exactly know where to turn, who to talk to. There wasn't a very clear reporting process in place, obviously. And they said that they would most probably go to the HR over the security teams. They reasoned that by saying that the HR is closer to employees, they trust the HR, and they trust that they would keep the confidentiality so that one of their big costs in their cost benefit equation wouldn't be there. They wouldn't get the stigma, and they believed that the HR would be able to handle the issue better. However, the HR is typically not trained on the security implications of insider threats. They do not know the risk, and they tend to just overlook some incidents. They do not pay proper care and attention to a reported incident, and usually what they respond is, okay, yeah, this was a little suspicious. Maybe you have a disgruntlement against your employee, maybe you had a fight, and they try to solve the issue on a human level rather than on a security level. And that's because they haven't been trained appropriately. And this is where we come down to the whole point of training and knowing what to do, how to do it, and when. Lack of training was reported to be the biggest barrier to reporting. Employees stated that over 72% of respondents cited a lack of training knowledge and a lack of confidence to report suspicious activity. They felt that they were unclear in identifying what is and what is not suspicious behavior, what should be reported and what should not be reported, and that they also did not realize the significance of insider threats and the significance of reporting. So even though they felt they heard somebody saying, for example, that, oh, I'm taking the product that I developed and I'm going to work with a competitor using all the knowledge that I acquired here and all the IP that I developed here, they didn't feel that this could be that significant for the organization, and they didn't feel it was worth reporting it. Some of their testimonials were saying that our company just says report anything suspicious. However, there is no guidance, there is no training, nothing. So they don't know what to do and how to report it and when to report it and what is the threshold of something that should be reported versus something that should not be. And another person said that it is actually a scary thing to do, and that they needed some form of training and process. Otherwise, I feel like I'm playing God. In other words, they needed guidance. What does all that teach us? What do these testimonials teach us? What does the research teach us? The research teaches us that on top of the technical measures, we also need to strengthen the human perimeter, as it is called, uh, that we should not underestimate the things that people are observing within the organization. And to do that, they need to be trained to recognize certain things and to adopt the security mentality and to realize what intellectual property means for an organization, why it is significant, what is considered suspicious behavior, and when to report it. So the training would have, of course, to be to the employees, but also specifically to HR, because people tend to go there, to management, because management also needs to learn to handle conflicts and to not let situations within the company and between the people in a company escalate, and to recognize and to generally teach people how to recognize and report suspicious activity. As a bonus, it strengthens the security culture, and it also acts as a defense against social engineering, because in this case, people know what is considered an organizational asset and why they need to protect it and why they need to apply appropriate security practices in their everyday lives, and also what it means to have a shared responsibility. The reporting process should also be in place, and it should be straightforward. It should be confidential. Anonymity, in all the cases, people felt that anonymity needed to be ensured and guaranteed, and no fault reporting process in case somebody was wrong or did a misjudgment, and a specific a specific channel, team, a person to report to, because it's one thing to know that yes, I should say something about this, and another thing to know where to turn and where exactly to submit that. This is still, of course, a very controversial topic. Companies still feel very defensive against insider threats. They do not want to talk about it. They do not want to think that this could happen to them. This is a thought that 9 out of 10 companies are suppressing. And that's because they fear that if they actually tackle this problem, they will create a toxic organizational culture. They also fear that this is not going to happen in their backyard and not in my backyard phenomenon. And that's mostly because not enough cases are being made public. And especially in the automotive industry, there are technical issues that are being covered and that are very much in the news around car hacking and around the cybersecurity threats in the automotive industry, and not enough about insider threats, although we see that these things still do happen. So companies very often feel that this is not something that concerns them. A last word on avoiding paranoia. As we said, people are fearing a toxic culture. But this is not necessarily the reality. It does not have to be that way. If you handle insider threats appropriately with discretion, and if you integrate measures against insider threat as a way to strengthen the security culture, the organization, to protect people's job from malicious insiders, and generally the way you handle the topic should not cause any paranoia. Yeah. So it's generally every all the time. It's a matter of approach and a matter of how you put that idea to the rest of the people that are actually listening to you. And in the case now of this community, we talked a lot about what not to say and what to protect. But do not get overly paranoid in terms of trusting other people as well. It's one thing to put protective measures in place to protect your intellectual property, your trade secrets, things that keep you afloat as a business and make you thrive, and a whole other thing to stop communicating out of fear not to disclose something that you shouldn't to the rest of the community. Community support is still very important, and you should be part of that community, and you should engage, and you should learn from others, because you still have a common thread, and you still have to deal with very common issues in cybersecurity. ASRG is doing that. John is trying to build that community. He has done a very good job so far, and people have a chance to exchange information that are not confidential, that are not proprietary information, but are common concerns, common threats, and together to build a better community and to build a better future for the automotive industry. So, yeah, do not share confidential information, but do still talk with one another and share stories, issues, situations that are happening around, yeah, around the threats that you are all facing. Here are some recommended resources if you want to deep dive a little bit further into the whole topic of employee risk and of insider threats. There is one framework, because I'm often being asked what framework could be applied. There is the holistic management of employee risk that is provided by the Center for the Protection of the National Infrastructure, which is very, very good if you want to read about it. Keep a screenshot of this, take a look if this is something that concerns you, or simply eventually reach out to me if you have more questions and I can help. I would be happy to. You can reach me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or ask your questions right now to John, and we will discuss a few of them. Yeah, and I would be happy to keep this conversation going. Thank
Christina,
you.
thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. We're so focused on protecting the products, once they're in the field, to make sure that they're secure and safe. We tend to forget about one of the most important attack vectors for our products is through the design phase. And so I
Mhm.
really appreciate, your viewpoint here about insider threats, and something that we don't actually consider also in risk assessments or
Mhm.
stuff like this that we're doing during the development lifecycle to protect our products. So really interesting stuff. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you for inviting me, and it was a good chance to discuss it, because these things do happen and they do shift the balance between companies in the industry.
So I'm not going to let you go quite yet. Um,
I wasn't planning to go.
um, so I would like to first of all, oh, someone's saying they don't hear me very well, but I'm hoping we have a few questions. First of all, one of the questions is coming from the audience. Christina, can detection be influenced by racial or cultural bias? For instance, I wonder if Asians are viewed more suspicious than others. It's easy for humans to allow prejudices to guide them. Um, yeah.
That's a very nice question. It's interesting. I've gotten a similar question before. I didn't expect it to come up again. Surely your perception of another person is going to influence whether you have suspicions towards them, whether you feel something is off or not, and their detection is not entirely dependent on you, but reporting is dependent on you. And after, even if you do a mistake, even if you misjudge the situation, and even if your own prejudices take over and you report this behavior wrongly, there is a second step in assessing whether that person is actually doing something wrong, is involved in some sort of criminal activity or not. So it's not entirely dependent on this one person that will report it. There is room for error.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not the employee's responsibility 100%.
Yeah, of course. Okay, thank you very much for the answer. Um, so guys, if you do have more questions, please go ahead, add them in the live chat window. Christina, I also have some questions of my own. I have like four little post-it notes here with different scribbles on them, so let me see if I can understand them again. So when you're talking about technical controls, and we talk about technical controls and product development and so on, but what types of technical controls do we have for insider threats? Are there tools that are available which companies can use to also as a control for insider threat?
Yeah, of course there are. And this is not entirely my responsibility as I focus mostly on what to do on the human level and on the human aspect of security. This is why I also talk more about reporting and the importance of awareness. However, technical controls exist in the forms of data leakage tools, tools that are detecting unusual or suspicious behavior uh, in different devices. For example, big downloads of very big volumes of data that might appear to be suspicious, watermarking documents so that and monitoring them to see whether they exit your systems, your networks. There are ways to monitor the emails of an organization to see whether certain documents end up in suspicious email addresses outside the network. For example, Gmails or Hotmails or private addresses. Anyway, emails they are not supposed to end up to.
Hmm.
So there are plenty, but I am not the right person to put the technical controls in
Okay.
place.
All right. So no, that's great. Just to understand, I mean, in Germany here, we're always concerned about our privacy as well. And when we're at work, and we talk about insider threats and protecting those, but we also, how do we protect our privacy at work as well? Or is there any privacy at work?
It depends on the organization you work with and what kind of agreement you have done with them. So there are certain companies that choose to accept the risk of insider threat, which I don't necessarily agree with, and not place any monitoring tools. And there are other organizations that clearly state from the start that suspicious activity will be monitored. It is also the reason why certain websites are being blocked. For example, nobody complains about not having the freedom to access Facebook if they are at work. And similarly, it is okay if they are also notified that certain activities will be monitored in case of suspicious activity so that they can also protect the employees themselves from losing their job potentially because of a bad incident.
Okay.
And
Uh,
I know that Germany is very concerned with privacy. However, there is a trade-off to how far you go with that, and there is the never-ending debate between privacy and security, and
mhm.
what actually has the bigger stakes.
Yeah. No, completely agree. Actually, privacy and security, it's very difficult sometimes to find the line. So, um, thank you for the answer. Scott was asking a question in the chat as well. Any data from past cases that might back up which countries are sponsoring the most insider threats? As we
Really?
meant, as we mentioned in the last question, this can be a little difficult subject.
This is a very political subject that I would rather not comment on. There are resources out there that you can read about industrial espionage, about economic espionage, and which countries are the biggest players in intellectual property theft. But I would rather not take position, like not
Hmm.
comment on that because
No,
there is a big geopolitical agenda behind it.
are there specific countries that don't have policies in place regarding insider threats or espionage? Maybe a little bit different asked, but
They do not have any policies in place concerning espionage. Not any country that I know of, because this is a global game, and every country has players in that game.
mhm.
The ones that do not are very defenseless, so this doesn't happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So what happens I send emails back and forth. What happens if I accidentally send my private email or something like that, a document that I shouldn't? Is there a way that I don't that I can discuss this, or how do I go about when I accidentally and myself identify it? How do I go about this with my company to say, hey, listen, I accidentally did this?
I mean, this sounds very suspicious to me, because my next question would be, you accidentally attached a confidential document and sent it to yourself. How can you accidentally do that?
No, but when you type an email, you type in, okay, the first few letters of the email. So if I'm typing something to also John, but in the organization, and accidentally it automatically autofills my address, and I don't really look, and I hit enter, and it sends me an email, uh, as an example.
I assume that in this case there are further auditing processes that see whether this was a one-time thing, what happens with that document, how critical that document was, and depending on a set of things, the company will then try to identify whether this was intentionally done. I am pretty sure that your whole stance is being taken into account.
Hmm.
And after that, it really depends on the management, the security teams, and the attitudes within the company on how this will be handled. But if it's a document that has low criticality, you're a loyal employee for years, etc., etc., this
Hmm.
should also factor in.
Do y- do you see cases where there is supposedly accidental leakage of internal documents? Because on the market, we see lots of confidential documents that shouldn't be shared. And
Yes.
how is that happening?
You can say that this happens most often when an organization hasn't communicated thoroughly towards the employees what information classification means, uh, what documents are classified as sensitive or as confidential and shouldn't be shared. In this case, we also notice this when we run open source intelligence reports. In this case, you have a lot of accidental shares of confidential documents or data. But if employees are well informed, the risk is much lower
Hmm.
because they are more aware of it. They are more careful not to share something because they know there are repercussions and that it's not okay.
Okay. Is and maybe one last question here. Is this so are the controls for insider threats potentially reducing the amount of efficiency that we have in the workplace? or
The
do you
what?
see that?
Can you repeat it because I didn't hear the first part?
So when is controls for insider threats, are these potentially reducing the efficiency in the workplace?
Not really, because they employees don't have to do much. They do not have to monitor other employees. They are not supposed to play big brothers within the company. The concept of insider threat awareness when it comes to the everyday employee is to just know a suspicious behavior when they spot it, which means they do not actively seek to do it. But when they see explicit insider threat behavior or highly suspicious behavior, and this is something we see very often, employees knowing for a fact that something is really wrong, then to just have this light bulb pop up in their head and say, yeah, this is something I should actually disclose. In this case, no, there is no disruption of everyday activities because they do not seek out suspicious behavior until they see it and um, it rings a bell.
Okay. All right.
And of course, I have to add that it also depends on how the organization handles this issue. There are very big differences between companies, between management teams, also when it comes to the communication of the whole topic. So I would say it also depends on that, but typically it shouldn't disrupt everyday life, everyday productivity.
Okay. Great. Christina, once again, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us. I think it's really important that I state here that ASRG is definitely not about insider threats. What we're trying to do is ensure that knowledge and information is shared, which is not considered intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something that we have to be very conscious about, especially when we talk with each other, networking in between, and so on. The idea here, guys, is that we ensure that the IP stays within the companies. But
Mm.
anything that's available on the open market is fair game to talk about and discuss. So,
Yes, there is a difference between sharing confidential information and a difference between exchanging open, openly open information that are of importance and could help someone else and does not affect your yeah your information classification policies. It does not disclose things you shouldn't. Yeah.
yeah. So, once again, this is Christina Lekati. Christina, would you like to say a few words before we close?
I want to wish everyone a very good rest of the day and to encourage you to look this topic up in advance because it's always good to be prepared for these types of incidences and to not neglect the behavioral aspect of security because it does play a role and it can help. And to also thank you, John, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here.
Christina, thank you very much. This is where it starts, educating yourself about these different topics, being aware, having awareness about insider threats, about technological threats. This is why we're here. This is ASRG. So thank you very much for joining us to this evening, this day. And please remember, we have so many webinars coming up. Next week is going to be really interesting, so please join back. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much, guys.